So this is the first LOWcast, an opportunity for Low Europe to bring to a wider audience some of the expertise that we have found amongst those with whom we have worked and who've been present at some of our principal events. And one of the contributors' standout contribution at the SME assembly last year was from Professor Friederike Welter, who is the president of the Institute for Mittelstand in Bonn and a professor of management and entrepreneurship. So can I first begin by welcoming you, Friederike, to our first LOWcast.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
So in your work, obviously you've encountered the problems that SMEs, small and medium enterprises, have been facing up to in the course of the COVID pandemic. One of the perhaps overused words has been unprecedented. But is it unprecedented? To what extent actually can you see from past crises, whether they were recessions, financial crises over a decade ago, can you see some of the patterns about how small and medium enterprises are responding to this crisis that reminds you of how they've responded to crises in the past?
Yeah, definitely. That was also the first thing we did when the COVID pandemic and the crisis actually started, going back to what's been said about how SMEs got through the financial crisis 2008 2009, and we did see similar patterns, at least in the beginning of this pandemic, and that is that basically small businesses try to hold on to what makes them successful, and that is the people in the business. So basically trying to hold on as much as possible and as long as possible to their staff, to their customers in a particular way. So that is a very strong pattern which characterized the first months of the crisis. I'm not so sure how long that actually will continue to be a pattern. There is a few patterns which I think may have been in the financial crisis as well, but which actually are also specific to this COVID pandemic. And that is basically what I call is it's both society giving back and SMEs giving back to society, and actually showing huge solidarity not only with their customers or society but also amongst themselves, and thus trying to leveling out some of the side effects of having to close down their businesses or losing demand in a dramatic way.
Of course, one of the things we've seen, haven't we, in the last year is a very sharp increase in the number of startup businesses. But these are often, this is the distress activity, as it were, of people who've lost their jobs, of coming out of larger businesses that are contracting, and some of the turbulence between sectors. So some sectors like the retail sector, very hard hit. Does that mean we're going to be looking at unusually turbulent conditions, particularly for micro businesses over the next years?
Yeah, I do think there are two things. And going back to what you said about startups being mostly, let's say, created out of necessity. Yes, that is one thing, but we don't see that as much, at least in Germany, for the time being, and I guess for most European countries as well, because the governments actually came in with tremendous immediate aid and longer term support. What we see also are startups which had been in the process of being created, and they actually, we were interested in what happens with those. Are they actually now put on hold, or are they kind of going away or something like that? So the interesting phenomenon here, when it's more knowledge-based startups, like startups created out of universities or by younger people coming from universities, those are put on hold, but with the intention to see that through to market, which I think is quite promising. At least that was, let's say, end of last year. So it would be interesting to go back to those people and ask them a year in the future now. I do think we will see turbulences not only when it comes to the startup scene, but turbulence is also when it comes to who is going or which businesses are going to exit. in the longer run. We don't see these turbulences still at the moment, neither in my own country nor in, I guess, other European countries. And that is because of the tremendous government support put out by most of the countries and by the European Union. Whether that is good is another question, because normally I would argue that at one point you need to let people and businesses leave the market as well. Yeah, as difficult and as let's say individually disturbing that is also, but that point has not yet come. Yeah. So the turbulences, I often get that question. I think we need to wait maybe another 6 months, maybe a year to see that, but there certainly will be. My worry is that we will lose some of the diversity of the SME sector. We know, of course, that there are certain sectors which are especially hard hit, like tourism, like retail, which has been had, let's say, structural changes for years, but these are kind of accelerated now. Let's say, the cultural sector. And my greatest worry really is that we will lose what characterizes SMEs in the SME sector, and that is its variety.
But do you think one of the characteristics of successful entrepreneurship is often that people have set up businesses and they've failed, and they learn from the failures as much as they learn from the successes? So entry and exit is pretty important in the small business world. So, but do you think actually after these experiences, we're going to get perhaps a more accommodating environment for the fact that people have run a business and it's failed and they start up again? Because the most entrepreneurial societies are those where people are repeat entrepreneurs, serial entrepreneurs. So do you think in Europe that actually is something that people might be more understanding about in the years ahead?
That is actually an interesting thought. Never thought about it that way, but it would be a really good outcome of, let's say, the COVID pandemic as well, making people more accommodating of, okay, a business can fail, and but also accommodating of, okay, businesses come in all sorts, and it's just it's the smaller ones, it's the micro ones, it's different sectors, etc., etc. So that could be something which actually policy needs to look at as well. Let businesses fail, because that is what we economists argue for at the moment, because they can't uphold all businesses endlessly, especially if those had been, let's say, in a bad shape when the pandemic started. Those need to go out of the market, but then also make this, say, a common pattern of what entrepreneurship is about. You go into the market, you go out of the market. I think what I think is problematic, what I see at the moment, like when you listen to media stories, talks with entrepreneurs here in Germany, is that very many entrepreneurs are on this brink of losing confidence. So when you talk to them, let's say when I talked to them a few months ago, it was like, okay, yeah, this is a crisis. We know we are hit hard. It's very problematic. We don't know what this future will bring, but we can manage somehow. But now there seems to be this kind of tipping point where entrepreneurs are getting more and more desperate, like saying, okay, when will we be able to open again? You need to give us this perspective. We don't know how to cope. I mean, for very many small ones, or for those in hard hit sectors, it's understandable, because they've also they have lost money, yeah, and the reserves they had in the beginning actually might be gone as well. But I think there is a tipping point at the moment, and it's very, very important that we don't let that just go, because then we will lose entrepreneurship as such. Yeah, I mean, entrepreneurs are used to living with uncertainty, but it seems that personally, very many of them actually kind of can't hold on any longer.
Yeah, well, they are used to living with uncertainty, but of course, the uncertainties that they normally have to live with are those of market movements and consumer behavior and so on.
Yeah.
This is something, it is literally unprecedented, the scale and the duration of the external pressures they're put under. But you, Friederike, you were talking about policymakers, and of course, it might be quite interesting to know what you think about how they should respond, because at the moment I get the impression speaking as a former policymaker myself, that they are still rather fixed in survival. They're trying to keep everything from falling down, including many businesses. They're going to have to shift, aren't they? But are there some ideas about that you've seen that you really value about how the policymakers can help small businesses, the entrepreneurs, to shift from survival to innovation and growth again?
Yeah, I think it's I fully agree. They do need to shift from the survival mode towards a more future oriented, or let's say at least a medium term policy orientation. I've been thinking about this over the past days because we are currently working on a paper where we try to go into this. We have a public discussion in Germany at the moment, create perspectives for small and medium enterprises. And the business associations want long-term strategies, which I don't think can work in a pandemic, because policy making actually is currently conducted under the same constraints as entrepreneurs work under normally. So there's huge uncertainty and it's unprecedented, as you rightly said, and no one actually knows. And because there is this interplay between getting the health conditions correct and kind of keeping the pandemic as such under control, and then the economic stuff comes in. So what if I take Germany as an example, what the government did in last summer was creating a kind of what they call future-oriented program. And when I look at what they actually wanted to support in there, it's all these what really needs to be put on the table again. It's like climate change and the impact on small businesses. It's like the role of artificial intelligence in helping small businesses create more sustainable business models as well as. But somehow the pandemic actually kind of overrules all of this sort of policy making. So it's like policymakers are getting back into the survival mode again and again. So what we are trying to argue for is that to give perspective to small businesses, what we need to do is we need to have a public conversation, and that's really important that policymakers pitch into that, trying to move away from we create another immediate aid or immediate support program towards what will come after the pandemic. Or let's say, I'm not sure the pandemic will be over this year or next year, but how can we actually move forward despite of there being a pandemic? And that is like, I think it's difficult for ourselves as well to think into the future. I think it's difficult for the SME entrepreneurs as well, because the immediate survival and how do I get out of this and how can I actually keep my business and what I'm working on is what kind of we are focused on that. So I think there needs to be this public debate and a change in conversation, maybe a change in how media covers this discussion as well. I could say a lot about that one as well. Yeah.
Yes, probably don't get us started on how the media are covered, because important and vital as it is, the obsession with what is happening about COVID-19 is obscuring so many other issues. But just coming back to the policymakers, of course, across Europe, we've got this potential, haven't we, of national governments whose resources have been deployed on a massive scale to try and sustain businesses, to put liquidity into the system. And of course, there'll be a lot of businesses who will carry a lot of debt for a long time. But at the same time, you've got the European institutions, the European Commission with a recovery fund. That's very focused. It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because if, as we do, we talk to businesses and they're very engaged with the thought that as they develop now, they're going to be more digitally orientated than they were. And they are going to be decarbonising and climate conscious, sustainable finance, sustainable products, sustainable businesses. So, and the European Recovery Fund is very much about that, isn't it? It's more about that shape of support for that transition in the future than it is about doing the job of just sustaining the existing business activity. So I wonder, do you think that is, I mean, is that are businesses, in your experience, now going to engage with that recovery fund? Because it's now, isn't it? This is the weeks ahead. They need to be putting in place the kind of support schemes that are going to enable, particularly the small and medium-sized businesses, to make those transitions to digital and green.
I mean, there is an easy link to make between what's been happening to businesses, to small businesses throughout the COVID pandemic, and this recovery fund and the areas they focus on. Because what we see throughout the pandemic and the behavior of small businesses is exactly these points. Yeah, like businesses kind of changing their business model, going more digital, using digitization as a means to get into new business areas, to kind of search for where can we actually sustain the business over a long time. And also thinking about sustainability in a different way, not just decarbonizing, so getting green, but also in the way I said up front, like that this kind of collaboration or giving back to society or relying on society to sustain the businesses. So if that link can be made and saying, okay, look, what you've done so far is fantastic because you've actually made the first step on this road to transforming your business into sustainable and being laying the ground for being a business that can actually sustain and survive after COVID and actually moving into the future. If that link can be made, I'm pretty sure that businesses will realize, okay, this is where we need to go on.
Yeah, of course, one of your research interests has been in the social impacts of small and medium-sized businesses, and of course the innovation that comes with SMEs as well, Schumpeterian innovation in entrepreneurship. So, but I just wonder if you could maybe speculate a little about whether these experiences about people who have found that many large businesses have not been able to maintain their workforces, a lot of people who've lost jobs, changing jobs, a lot of retraining requirements, but also a lot of new business startups, whether actually, will this have an impact in society? Will this enable perhaps SMEs to be more diverse? Are we likely to see more, for example, people from disadvantaged communities starting up businesses for themselves? Are we going to see more women entrepreneurs? How is this going to impact in society? Because these are really rather dramatic times, and some changes in society are going to be quite profound. Do you think entrepreneurship is likely to be something that is going to gain out of that?
Yes and no. Yes, because what I'm seeing is that society kind of has come to cherish what's happening locally on the ground, and that basically is small businesses. It is the micro business. It is let's say the local company handing out etc. etc. So that I think is really, really good, because what we see here where my institute is located, we see lots of these buy local, go local initiatives, which kind of show the value of having a small and very diverse business community and entrepreneurship community on the ground. I'm still not very confident at the moment whether this will benefit all groups of entrepreneurs. You mentioned women's entrepreneurship. It's one of my fields of research and expertise as well, and I'm a bit concerned here at the moment because the conditions for women's entrepreneurship are tougher than they appear to be for, let's say, men entrepreneurs. And that has a lot to do with the infrastructure, because loads of the infrastructure closed down during the COVID pandemic. And I guess that's not particular to my own country, but to other countries as well. And it sometimes looks like we are going back 50 years when it comes to role models. It may be for good, because it actually may encourage women to look for different ways of kind of coping with this. We see lots of innovation in the care sector, for example, lots of opportunities, also women and others starting up businesses in the care industry, which I think is really good. But there also may be a different outcome, kind of pushing back women's entrepreneurship. Just use that one example to show that there is good and bad things about the diversity of entrepreneurship. And I don't have an answer just now. I think it needs to be monitored very, very closely. I would hope, I'm an optimist, and I would hope that we actually can sustain this diversity and we can actually push it forward as well.
Thank you very much. Professor Friederike Welter, thank you indeed. And ending on an optimistic note as well, which of course is something we all value in these troubled times. So, but thank you very much. And thank you for being our first special guest in a LOWcast, giving us an opportunity to think about how small and medium enterprises across Europe are responding to this present crisis and their prospects for recovery, focusing on the sustainability of business in the future. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for the invitation and the discussion.